Okay, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Schleifer. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ChartIQ. I appreciate you guys dialing in just a couple of housekeeping items. A link will be sent out afterwards to a recording of the webinar. So if you want to share with anybody or you miss certain parts, you'll be able to go and watch it there. It'll also go up on our website under the Resource Center, where in fact you can go and view previous webinars as well. This is part of a weekly webinar series that we've been doing and has just been, so far, the feedback's been really positive. So if there is anything that you'd like to suggest for future webinars, whether that's something we should do or something we should stop doing, please reach out and let us know. We appreciate the feedback. Today, I'm actually joined by two kind gentlemen. So first off, I'll give a brief introduction myself and then I'll introduce Fergus and Rico. So I'm Dan Schleifer. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at ChartIQ. We're obviously known for our namesake charting technology that's used by everybody from Yahoo Finance to E-Trade to a bunch of institutional banks and asset managers around the world. But we're also the creators of Finsemble, the smart desktop platform. And really what we're going to talk about today is a little bit more focused on that side of the business. We've been friends with the good guys over at Adaptive for a number of years now. They are based in the UK, although have offices around the world, and are a consultancy specific to capital markets. And so I'm joined today by Fergus, who came over to the States to open up their New York office and presence there. Has been with the firm for a long time. I'm also joined by Rico who will be presenting for actually the bulk of today's session, who is head of desktop strategy. And is a very sharp developer, but notably also is one of the co-chairs of the FDC3 working groups, is really passionate about kind of the future of the desktop and what's going on with interoperability and what we'll be talking about today, which is the concept of micro front ends and how applications will look in the future. They'll give a little bit more of an introduction of themselves in a couple of moments when they jump on, a little bit more background on the firm. With that, as I said, we as two different products, talking today about Finsemble, although we're going to spend most of the time actually just talking about the future of how applications will be built, regardless of what desktop platform you're using. So I just wanted to highlight this for a moment. Normally, when we talk about kind of the smart desktop or desktop interoperability, we're talking about things like workspace management, interoperability between applications, connectivity between those applications and enterprise infrastructure, pre-built integrations to the vendor applications that live on your desktop or your user's desktop. We're actually not going to talk about any of those things today, or not really, because all of these things are predicated around the idea of having applications on the desktop and connecting them together in smart ways. And certainly we do that. But what we're going to talk about today is a new opportunity in this new kind of design paradigm that's been created around micro front ends that really questions what is an application, how do we construct that, and is there a better way using technology like Finsemble to actually build those application building blocks of the smart desktop. To kind of start us on our journey, I wanted to kind of introduce the concept of monolith to micro. And I think most of us are familiar with microservices and this kind of design paradigm that's been with us for a number of years. And microservices are small, discrete services that can be autonomously deployed, that are all messaging enabled to speak with each other or speak with the front end, are decentralized, and really this idea of, instead of having a monolithic server backend, to have microservices where each one does an independent thing. And so I would have very purpose specific and generally being tied to a business process services that can then be used by different applications in the front end. This means that I don't have to have a huge release cycle for my backend API. I can have different teams building different bits of functionality. And this has worked out really well, and I would argue is kind of the new standard for how we think about building backend services. And it's worked out really well. I think it's deservedly now the standard bearer of architectural design. That doesn't always make sense, but almost always does. And so when we think about deploying into the cloud or deploying to our own server infrastructure, it's usually around this kind of an architecture. So the question is, if we look at microservices and we've said, okay, going from a monolith to microservices makes a lot of sense and has a lot of benefits, why do our user interfaces still look like this? Why do they still look monolithic? Notably, this application, which I'm actually a fan of, but just picking on for the moment, is stuck in a single browser tab, right? So it's kind of locked into its existence as a single window. It happens to only have one chart. I started a charting company. I really like charts. I want 6 of them. It has 5 different grids, and grids and blotters are really kind of the steak and potatoes of our industry. But it has them where the user interface designer thought they should be. They're not configured how I want them for how I'm actually going to be using the application. We've jammed so much functionality into a single page application that they've added 2 hamburger menus to access all that capability, because the web browser and the single page application wasn't built to have these really feature dense, feature rich applications with a lot of stuff to navigate. It's just not set up for that. And speaking of navigating, we've got these endless mutually exclusive side panels because we've added so much functionality that it can't all be on a single page at once, despite being a single page application. And so as I click on one, it hides other things, and I might want 2 things out at the same time, but the UX designer has decided, no, they're mutually exclusive. You can have A or B, not A and B. And so when we kind of look at this at the meta level and we say, okay, what is a single page application and what are those components? How do we explode that out into micro front ends? And so what we want to do is break these out into their own standalone modules that can be reused by different teams across the enterprise that aren't necessarily just specific to us. So for instance, in the upper left, we have a chart that might come from a vendor like us, ChartIQ, right? You've got a commercial charting component, not something that you want to build from scratch, but you need it. And being able to standardize on one and not have each team reintegrate it and customize it and deeply and tightly couple it into the application that they're building, right? Grids are used more than charts. They're used all over the place. So use a single open source grid and pass in configuration parameters into that grid component, again, instead of tightly coupling it into the application, so that we can then reuse it. And then finally, we've got an in-house WPF control, such as an order entry ticket. Maybe that's something that is pretty tightly locked into our order management system in the back end. Although it's visually small, it is large from a complexity standpoint. We don't want to replace it. So how do we actually blend in a native control that we don't want to replace yet in HTML5? And then finally, we get into the meat of the application, which is really what are the parts of the business logic and the user experience that are unique to this application. And those are the only things that we should be writing from scratch. Everything else we should be able to pull off the shelf as micro components in our micro front end. And that, that main set of the application could be Java Swing, it could be HTML5, it could be anything. But the point is, let's have our application teams not worry about rebuilding everything, have them just focus on the core of the application. Now, if we explode this out, we have to start bringing them back together. And Rico's going to actually take you through some demos and some examples of this. I'm just going to cover it at kind of the way we think about it from Finsemble as an architectural layer. So we need to be able to recompose these applications once we've broken them apart. So everybody's going to use the same grid with the same chart. I then need to be able to recompose an application that makes up the minimum viable set of functionality for my app. I then need to be able to compose those applications into workspaces across multiple monitors as a user. All of those components, all those applications have to be able to interoperate with each other and need to be able to build workflows in between them. So obviously, component to component inside an application, micro front ends, but also application to application. We're also going to need some shared services between these things. When we build a monolithic application, there are some things that usually are in the core of that application that all of the front end components use, and that could be things like authentication and authorization for what people should be able to see inside those components. Notifications. If I make up an application of 5 or 6 different micro components. I don't want them each having their own notifications. Logging, all these things I want centralized, and we can provide that as a shared services layer. You can almost think of these as microservices, but living on the desktop inside this kind of shared services layer for those micro front ends. So we can, again, recompose and bring it back together, not just visually, but for the infrastructure that they need. And then the last bit that we really need are, through the services layer, how do we connect these applications to the rest of our infrastructure? Each application, let alone each component within those applications, shouldn't be thinking, how do I persistently store data? It should just know that I have a local service exposed to me, data there, and then it takes care of how am I going to synchronize that back to a storage backend. Similarly with single sign-on. So some of these things are kind of local services, and some of those local services need to be extended back into the enterprise. We don't want every component, or frankly, every application reaching out for market data on its own. We don't want a dozen WebSockets opened up. And so the ability to actually funnel those together and to smartly kind of connect all of these applications back to the enterprise infrastructure. So we think that these are kind of 4 very minimum required capabilities to go through and to recompose applications built in a micro front-end architecture. Now, with that, kind of having introduced the concept, I'm going to pass the baton over to our friends over at Adaptive. Fergus is going to introduce you to himself and to the firm, and then Rico is going to take you through a technical level, some IT with the demonstration.
Thanks a lot, Dan, for that intro. Really good context in the journey you guys have gone on Finsemble. As Dan mentioned, I'm just going to take a couple of moments to introduce Adaptive for anyone who might not be familiar with us, and then we'll move on to Rico for the fun stuff. So did want to thank everybody for joining again today. My name is Fergus Keenan, and I am the director of the New York office of Adaptive, as Dan mentioned. I also want to take just a second to thank Dan and all the Finsemble team for hosting today, and for the kind words at the beginning. It's really been a pleasure working with the team and putting this together, and I hope everybody gets informed from the output and wants to learn more about Finsemble and desktop strategies in general after what you hear today. So Adaptive is a bespoke financial technology solution provider. We've been delivering for our clients for about 8 years from our offices in New York, London, which is our HQ, Montreal, and also Barcelona. Over that time, we've grown to about 200 consultants and delivered well over 75 solutions for our clients in capital and commodity markets. And we really believe that the most valuable solutions are delivered via true partnership with our clients. But I suppose, what does that really mean for us? Firstly, we feel that we create value by bringing our business domain experience and the proven technology accelerators that we've developed together with our bespoke delivery capability and that mindset. The solution value is then further enhanced when we deliver in really close collaboration with our clients. And those are the people that really understand the business problem best. So bringing all these elements together allows our clients to benefit from the full ownership of the business solution and really produces the most compelling results and lasting competitive advantage in our experience. I wanted to give you just a couple of examples of the types of solutions we've delivered over the years, and I've put together just a rough timeline to relate our practical experience to what Dan and soon you'll hear from Rico have been describing today. So back in our early days around 2012, we were mostly working on WPF and Java Swing monolithic applications, as Dan described. There's lots of that legacy technology out there on the desktop. These are very large scale projects, typically example in investment banking being multi-asset, single dealer platforms, cramming all the features and functionality across asset classes was a big theme around this time. As the desktop interoperability and kind of workflow-driven design started to emerge soon after this, we started working on modularizing some of those components out of these platforms. So an example here was taking a monolith and breaking out some of the key components, the blotters that Dan mentioned, the kind of nuts and bolts of these platforms, to create structured workflows for, say, a salesperson to more easily capture a trade with a client that they may have missed in the past due to the lack of tooling. These workflows were really effective, they created revenue opportunities, but they were pretty inflexible and usually developed in isolation. moving on, and as web development capabilities progressed, and they really became fit for purpose for developing these streaming reactive web applications, we then began delivering trading venues, execution platforms, things like sales trader workflows as asset classes got more and more electronified, utilizing this technology. And as before, these platforms progressed into modular workflow-based solutions. And as user-centric and design thinking became more and more prevalent, that was definitely the case. In more recent years, many of our clients have desired sophisticated desktop strategies, smart desktops, this kind of terminology. And this is really a means of making sense of their overcrowded desktops, unlocking more value from the massive investments they've made in sales and trader tools in particular, both on legacy and more recently on web technologies. So utilizing tools like Finsemble really allows us to put the desktop orchestration and the workflow creation capability into the hands of the users. And this adds the flexibility that was missing before. It allows the users to discover and create new workflows themselves and capture that new trade, further reduce operational risk, these kind of things that people are looking to do. So I hope that gave you a really good idea of the journey Adaptive have been through in relation to desktop solutions. I'll hand over to my colleague Rico, who will now take you through that experience in a bit more detail.
Hello, everyone. I hope I'm just checking my microphone is right. I'm really happy to be with you today. I'm going to jump straight in, and what Dan spoke about earlier really just inspired me to think about where I started in my career more than sort of 15 years ago, and the types of applications we used to build back then. It was typically monolithic applications, as both Dan and Fergus spoke about, and often there wasn't even a server involved. It was just some front end, a bit of business logic, a data access layer connecting directly to a database. But we started building client server applications. And the great thing about these applications was that, they were kind of self-contained. They were easy to deploy because it was just a single app. And certainly in the beginning, they were easy to work on, but I'm sure, as we all know, they would explode over time and become quite complicated to maintain. I think another important aspect was that they were all isolated, right? Such an application would work just in and of itself. And when I started working for Adaptive, people were still building applications like this, but especially for sort of our larger enterprise clients, it would often be this type of situation. You would have these monolithic clients connecting to their servers, but they would all run in their own world and not connect to each other. And because of that, teams and business areas worked in complete isolation from each other, and it was hard to integrate. At some point, people realized it was a good idea to do this. We can put an enterprise service bus in, and pieces can start communicating with each other, and that way, some of the functionality and the logic on one server can talk to another server. A lot of applications we built in the early days even used the enterprise service bus to directly stream data to the client because it needed to be fast and responsive. But soon people wanted to start connecting the disparate applications together as well. And I worked on a project when I first joined Adaptive for a large tier 1 investment bank, where we had to do just such a thing and kind of launch a widget from different applications that offer similar functionality. I think it was to do with rolling a swap from the client. So we had to get this widget in front of users and have a way for different applications to launch it dynamically. And we kind of did this, right? And we didn't call it a micro front end back then. It was just a widget, but we built it. It was, I think, built in WPF. But we also did a lot of work on the infrastructure to put this in place to make it easy to push it to users' machines to dynamically launch it regardless of which application triggered it, and to communicate and transfer the data from, the parent application to the widget and back. So that was that world. And then as Dan spoke so well about, microservices happened, and people realized that this idea of connecting servers and together was actually really useful, and we can do that at a much more atomic scale and make it a key part of our architecture. And that brought lots of benefits, as Dan mentioned. We have smaller code bases. We can start decoupling our teams a bit. We reduce this barrier of adoption for new technologies because you can change individual services on their own, and your deployment gets smaller and easier. This scalability and adaptability gives you a lot of different ways to compose your services together into larger workflows. And I'm going to come back to these benefits when we talk about micro-frontends later, because we'll see a lot of similarities. But this new world also came with a lot of challenges. And, we see this firsthand in a lot of our projects. Inherently distributed systems are more complex. All the pieces have to communicate with one another. It has to be tested end to end. And if you have to change multiple services at the same time, you've got to plan that and roll that out. Deployment can be much harder because you have multiple tools with different technologies written by different teams that you've all got to sort of roll out and coordinate. Importantly, a mechanism for service discovery was really important. And in the early days with microservices, with the applications we built, all of these things were really hard. People were still figuring out how to solve these challenges. I think the industry has come a long way, and now with tools like Docker and Kubernetes, a lot of these things are now automated for us, and we can focus just on writing the microservices themselves. And when you go and read documentation about microservices architectures, you'll often see a diagram like this. And, as Dan touched on, you have these decoupled microservices, but the client is still monolithic, and it has to connect to all of them and bring everything together. And in practice, what we see when we go to clients, when we first get there, is more something like this. The client has to aggregate the data, sometimes the logic, from all of these different services and and deal with it in one application. Now, this might happen inside the client, where it tries to coordinate the connection between the services. It might also happen outside the client in dedicated aggregation services that sit between the microservices and the client. And the story we often hear is that organizations will tell us that to make a simple change to their UI, for example, adding a column to their blotter, they actually have to change the UI. They have to change one or more of the aggregation services, which then causes the microservices to change as well. And now you're really back to square one, because you have a monolithic architecture. You have to plan changing everything at the same time. And it's actually now more complex because of all of the deployment complexities that come with microservices. So you haven't really solved this monolithic architecture problem. Which is why this kind of approach, where you can start breaking front ends into smaller pieces, makes so much sense. It's much easier to coordinate connections just between the front end and those services that it needs on the back end, and you can keep your legacy application that users are still using, but you can incrementally roll out new front ends onto the desktop, and then you start seeing all of the benefits. Different teams being able to work on different pieces, the deployment of all the changes to an individual micro front end being easier to do than a wholesale deployment of a big application. being able to use different technologies, etc. But in reality, what you still need is a way to orchestrate all of that. On the back end with microservices, as I've mentioned, you need orchestration tools. And exactly the same is true of the front end. You need a place for all of these micro front ends to slot into and to coordinate them, to do the orchestration, to do the discovery and the deployments. All of those things that we did when we built our first micro front end that I talked about to make it work, to bring all the pieces together, that still has to be done. And just like we can use orchestration tools for microservices nowadays, a platform like Finsemble allows you to do exactly the same for micro front ends. It helps you to put in place those cross-cutting concerns, to do the application discovery, to integrate native applications. And I think something that I'm very passionate about, and what really starts to add value to businesses, is when you start also connecting not only the micro front ends to the backend microservices, but actually can start connecting micro front end pieces to each other. There's some really powerful workflows that you can put in place like that. And what you really start to get to is not thinking about building individual applications anymore, but building workflows made up out of micro front ends, out of old and new applications. And that's changed a lot how we think about desktop strategy at Adaptive and how we advise our clients to build their front ends nowadays. So I mentioned, that I'm going to talk about these benefits again, and you'll notice that a lot of them are the same as for microservices. I've mentioned the being able to split apart the teams, etc. I've talked about the composable user workflows that you can create. Also very important is that, finally there's a migration path for those older UIs. You can start breaking them apart and migrating them in smaller bits, one at a time, without having to do a big rewrite, which is so daunting. But just like with microservices, there's challenges here. You have to run your web applications in secure web containers on the desktop. You have to have a means of communication. You need to have that way to register apps and configure them. You need a consistent user experience, workspace management. And I think this is one area where perhaps the challenge is slightly different on the front end than it is on the back end. Users are key to this, and this is why workflow is so important, and user experience is so important. And having the tooling that allows you to put that in place is such a big win. App discovery via integrated search, a way to integrate with native applications. This is something we actually found in a lot of the projects we've done in the past is one of the hardest bits. Having a way to easily create a cohesive desktop experience that spans your old and your new applications. And then all of the tooling that goes around logging and monitoring these micro front ends. And the wonderful thing is that Finsemble offers features in all of these areas, and they can give you a smart desktop platform that can give you that leg up, so that you can focus on building the micro front ends themselves in the same way that the orchestration tools on the back end allows you to do that with microservices. So I've talked a lot now. I think we should make it practical. Let's look at some examples of that. And what I'm going to show you is Adaptive Showcase application Reactive Trader, which has been around for as long as the company has, really. And we use it to show to people because we can't always show the real work we do for clients. It's an FX application, and I just want to stress that it's not a real FX application, it's a showcase. But it helps us to show the type of applications we build for people and the type of solutions we can help our clients with. So I'm slightly nervous because I'm going to do a live demo today, but let's see how it goes. So
I'm confident in you, Rico. I think it's going to be great.
So I'm going to show you the very first version of Reactive Trader that we built, to go along with this look at where we started and where we are today. Ooh, I don't think I exited the slideshow. There we go. Right, so this is Reactive Trader. It's a click once WPF application, and we built it, in the early days to show how we can build a really responsive application with live streaming data and the architectural principles we apply. But just as we spoke about, this is a monolithic application that we built in .NET, and we also did a web version of this application later on to show to you. And this, you'll see it looks very similar to the WPF application. And this runs with ASP.NET on the website. And it has the same functionality. But even though it's a web application, it's still the monolithic application. Everything here is built and deployed and controlled together. So when we got the opportunity to rewrite Reactive Trader with modern web technologies, which is this version, it's built with React. It uses microservices in the back end. You can see here all of the various microservices that it's connected to, and it's got all of the features that you'd expect from a modern web application. It's got theming, and the wonderful thing is it's open source on GitHub. You can go to our GitHub site and download it and play with it. So we love putting this out there to show people how we build financial applications. And you can trade in here, and very similar to the other application. If you toggle the view, the old view that you saw there, the design elements are still there from the old application, but it's come a long way. The important difference with how we built this application is we really embraced the modular way of building web applications. Each area in this application is really a separate root. So that means I can pop out individual bits and run them on their own. And this becomes really powerful when you want to deploy it in a micro-frontend application. So, there's some architecture involved and some patterns we've applied to make it easily portable to a micro-frontend and sort of give you the benefits both of a bigger application composed out of smaller pieces, but also the ability to run those pieces on their own. So I'm now going to close that down, and I'm going to launch Finsemble. So this is our adaptive branded Finsemble deployment, and Finsemble allows you to kind of take their platform and apply your branding to it that makes sense for your organization. So what you should see is the Finsemble toolbar coming up, and that gives us some of that orchestration that I talked about. So there's an app launcher where a lot of widgets have been registered, and what we've done here is we've really taken some of the Reactive Trader components, modular components, and we've just put them as standalone windows in Finsemble. So I can launch the blotter from here. I can launch one of the trading tiles from here. I can trade it. It all works as you expect. And it's really just those same web components hosted in Finsemble secure Electron windows on the desktop. But it's nice how it's all brought together with a consistent UX by the Finsemble launcher. And what this also allows us to do is to create workspaces and really compose those workflows together for users that I spoke about. So I'm going to launch this one. And what you will see here is some of the Reactive Trader components that I've already shown to you, but it's also been integrated with a ChartIQ chart component running in a window. And the Finsemble desktop features now allows us to snap these windows together. I can link them together and move them around. Oops, there we go. And I can do things like I can drag and drop data between components. So you can see how you can really create a compelling and unified experience for people. And what I'd also like to show you, which I think is quite cool, is I've talked a lot about doing native integration, and that can be quite hard. And we have an application here that we call the limit checker. And this is actually a proper WPF application that we built alongside Reactive Trader. And it communicates with Reactive Trader on the desktop through the Finsemble router. So you can see that as I do trades in this application, this one also picks it up, even though this is a web application and this is a .NET WPF application. And similarly, this application controls the trade limits in here. So you can see that AUD USD can't be traded at all at the moment because it's notionally set to 0. So if I try to trade it in here, that credit limit will be exceeded and will prevent me from trading. The great thing though is, even though this is a .NET application that predates Finsemble and this sort of smart desktop world, I can fully integrate it into this environment. It's part of my workspace. It opens and closes along with my workspace, and I can properly make it part of my windowing. So when we think about creating and focusing on the workflows as opposed to individual applications in a micro-frontend world, these kind of things are actually really hard to do if you try to do them yourselves, which is why Finsemble has so much value as an orchestration tool for putting your micro-frontend based desktop strategy in place. Right, so that is everything I had to show you today. So I hope you've gotten just a little bit of a flavor of how, micro front ends can transform the way that we build applications in the financial industry, but really everywhere, and how orchestration and a framework for those micro front ends to fit into place is extremely important to make it all come together. I think at Adaptive, we've been doing this for a long time, as you saw, and we've got lots of experience in delivering real projects in this area. And if you're interested in both in Finsemble, but also in how you can put a desktop strategy in place and how you can start focusing on workflows that can transform the way your users work, then we'd love to speak to you about it.
Rico, I just wanted to jump in and say thank you. That was an awesome demo. I picked up on a nugget that I think is going to become a Rico Eckstein famous catchphrase, which is not building applications, but building workflows. And I love that because, this whole idea of reusability of components and not thinking about how do I go about building application X, but how do I solve for workflow Y? And that could be a variety of existing components. They could be web. It could be some new components or new business logic, but really focusing on those workflows and not how do I build this specific application. With that, I think we've got a number of questions coming into the Q&A panel. For those of you that are on the call, please feel free to submit your questions there. I think Rico and I are going to go kind of back and forth. I will let you that first one about grids.
Yeah, sure. I'm just trying to bring up my Q&A panel. It went away when I did the. Yes. Can you please ask me the question? Thank you.
As mentioned earlier, grids are a common use case. What technologies are you seeing clients use to implement microservices to back those grids?
Sorry, can you ask that again? I was just trying to see the questions. Oh, I've got it in front of me now. So that's actually a really interesting question, and this is sort of an area that we are quite interested in as well, because we have to build things like exchanges and have really high volume streaming data coming into applications. And we've even built some accelerators in this area that we work with on clients, and we've had a lot of success with virtualization and doing a lot of the work on the server side, so that you only on the client try to render the data that you see on the screen, and that you only push updates. So if you do some work on the communication channels you're using, and pushing just the changes in the data, you can make it very fast and very responsive. And it very much depends, I think, on your exact requirements and the type of application you're trying to build.
I'm not the technologist that Rico is, but I know GraphQL keeps coming up with a lot of our customers and how they're starting to expose the data-driven kind of to micro-frontends. There's a question here that I'll take. Can you talk a little bit about security issues you must mitigate when you bring web technology to the desktop? It's a great question. So, we're used to running web technology in browsers, and browsers have a very strong sandbox that is designed for running completely untrusted content from any random website on the internet and not letting it speak with your other browser tabs, and certainly not interact with the desktop APIs. In a smart desktop environment, where you're using a container like Electron, you're pulling applications together, and you're by definition wanting them to talk to each other. So in a browser, I don't want my Facebook tab and my online banking tab to talk to each other because they have no business interacting with each other. But with what we're talking about in the enterprise desktop, you do want them talking to each other. And so securing the applications effectively from each other and securing the communications between them is critical. And then the other aspect is, how do you actually protect the desktop from these applications when you no longer have the traditional browser sandbox? We're actually in the process of putting together and publishing a white paper on that that will be out. And in fact, we're hosting a webinar next week with Finos all about this topic of securing the desktop in a smart desktop environment. We just open sourced our secure Electron adapter, which implements all of the core security recommendations for the Electron container. Open source that through Finos, and are hosting a webinar about that next week. Rico, I'll let you take these FTC3 questions that have come up, because you're the FTC3 guy.
Yes, there's two questions about FTC3, which makes me really happy. I think, as Dan mentioned in the beginning, I'm quite involved with FTC3. In case you haven't heard of it, the financial industry has come together and realized the need for standardizing interactions between micro-frontends on the desktop, which is wonderful. People from across vendors, across financial organizations are working together on that. And the question is, how important do you see FTC3 being as an enabler for delivering extensible desktop workflows? I think that's the short answer is it's very important. And I think there's an analogy again that you can see if we look at the microservices world, where standardization of communication patterns between microservices has been a key enabler for it to scale and expand in the way that it has, and really transform the way people build backend applications. And I think the same is true on the front end. If we can have those conversations about how components communicate, how does the data look that they send to each other, if we can have those conversations once and can agree on them and standardize them, then we can all focus on building those compelling user experiences and workflows. So that's why I'm involved in FTC3 and why we at Adaptive are excited about what that allows us to do. And I might add that, you know, Finsemble and ChartIQ is involved in the FTC3 community as well and integrate FTC3 into their product.
And I'll take the second bit of the question that came in, which is what can we look forward to in FTC3 1.1? There's a bunch of new stuff in there. What I'll tell you that I'm excited about and I think is going to leave an indelible mark on this space is that there's now a standard interface. And so FTC3 1.0 was focused around, you know, what are the message formats and how do I express an intent to open an application or pass a message. With 1.1, we're seeing standards around the actual APIs such that vendors don't need to write specifically to, say, the Finsemble APIs. And they can write to a standard FTC3 API, which means that individual application vendors, whether that's a trading platform or it's a fintech or market data component or whatever it is, can write to one API and can distribute to clients of Finsemble as well as clients of our competitors. And I think that that's great. And it's an example of where FTC3 is a collaboration between us and our competitors as platform providers. Also, consultancies like Adaptive and application providers are coming together to open that up.
There's a wonderful question here about COVID-19 and how the well, I'll read the question. With COVID-19 here to stay for a while and changing the way we work, what opportunities are there with a smart desktop? And I think this is actually really interesting because we've been having a number of conversations with clients of ours around this topic. And what we've heard is that desktop strategy and looking at workflows is actually has become even more important now. I think for a long time in the financial industry, the focus has been on sort of multi-monitor workflows and spreading your application out over 6 monitors. The reality is that now when people are working at home, they might only have 1 monitor, but the amount of applications they use and the amount of things they have to do hasn't changed. So workflows, become even more important. We at Adaptive, we have this phrase that we sometimes use about leading users into the pit of success, right? You want to make it easy for them to do what they need to do. How can they make the decisions? How can they have timely events about things that they are interested in? So I see this whole area of desktop strategy of interoperability just becoming more and more important.
One here that I'd like to take, which is how much can I interact with the native Electron APIs on the background? It's actually a fantastic topic. So this dovetails into the security aspects. So Electron is a container to, instead of running in a browser, you're running a web application in Electron. Electron has Node.js running inside of it, and by default has access to desktop APIs. And so allowing applications to directly interface with Electron and hence also with the desktop can be a dangerous thing. And so, our approach and the approach that we take in our secure Electron adapter that again, we just recently open sourced, is to implement basically an API firewall that starts with least privilege. Where we actually block off all of the Electron APIs by default. We inject only the Finsemble APIs into the components, and that way they're interacting with the Finsemble services layer, and we're basically intermediating those controls. But that is configurable, that firewall. And so it starts by blocking everything, but then as a desktop owner, you can change those settings. As I mentioned, next week, I think it's next Thursday, our chief architect is hosting a webinar just about this topic, about Electron security, and I would highly recommend that you dial in.
Great. There's another question here about connection points and APIs. So the question is, all these connection points between micro-frontends and backend services means lots of APIs. How would you manage that? I think that's a great question. It's a very important question. just as we see with microservices, there's a need to have well-defined contracts and mechanisms for microservices to communicate. If we talk about the connections between your micro-frontends or really any web application that we write nowadays and the backend, I think Dan has already mentioned, for example, GraphQL. That's gained a lot of popularity in sort of decoupling clients from servers and servers from clients, and putting a shared domain model in place that both sides can talk to without necessarily being attached to each other. At Adaptive, because we build end-to-end systems and platforms, we have done a lot of work in this area, and we have a few accelerators as well that we work with clients with to allow us to put platforms into place. Things like web gateways and tools for code generation from contracts, etc. So, yeah, again, feel free to come and speak to us about that.
Just a couple more, and then we'll follow up individually with people who we didn't get to. I want to just be conscious of the time. I see one other question here I'll take, and then Rico, maybe one for you. How do you manage state between applications? It's a good question. So, modern web development has moved over to, frameworks like React and Angular, and those developers are now used to working with stores, Flux or Redux, and managing state that way. And so, that's something that I think had been previously quite difficult in micro front ends. The core approach, if you look at kind of containers and you look at what I would call, smart desktop 1.0 kind of frameworks, is basically just pure message passing. So whether that's broadcast or pub sub, and so you end up with a lot of chit chat and chatter between applications to maintain state, and it frankly, adds a lot of complexity and goes against the way that web application developers are used to thinking now. In Finsemble, as a platform provider, we built a distributed store that basically acts like Flux, but can actually have multiple components, even though they're each living in their own DOM and potentially even in their own renderer process, accessing that distributed store at the same time. And so we've tried to make sure that the developer experience and how you think about building a modern web application can still work in this environment. But that's something that we offer, and to be honest, I'm not sure if our competitors do. I don't believe so, but it's definitely, if you go down this path, it is something that you will inevitably come across as you start trying to maintain state yourself in a distributed system where you're basically using message passing. And so it is definitely a concern. And then I'll let you, Rico, take one more, and then we're going to wrap up.
Okay, great, thank you. So this question here about user experience design, which is a favorite topic of mine in this area. So I'm going to take that one. How do you ensure a consistent user experience when you combine multiple applications, old and new, written by different teams? I think this is a key area when we talk about building applications. Building workflows, not applications. And it goes back to the design level even. When you design what you're going to build, you've got to consider all of the pieces that are going to be part of the workflow. Sometimes, legacy applications or SaaS applications, or even, Outlook or Excel or whatever. You've got to think about all of the interactions, how one piece transfers to another, and how that all looks and how that all flows for the user. And yeah, at Adaptive, this forms a key part of what we bring for clients is our user experience team. Consider this and do great work even on design systems to pull everything together and make everything look consistent, but also look compelling and intuitive to the user.
On that note, we longer than we expected to. I appreciate the patience of everybody that's joined us. Rico and Fergus, thank you guys so much. Rico, great content. Love the demo. And like I said, a couple of catchphrases in there I'm going to pick up on. There are still some questions left. We'll reach out to you guys directly to make sure that we answer those. If you have questions on this slide, you can see our contact information, info@weareadaptive.com and info@chartiq.com. And we'd be both more than happy to chat about any of these topics, obviously something near and dear to our heart. On that note, like I said, this is a continuing webinar series. Once a week, you'll continue to get emails from us about the other webinars in the series. Next week is security of Electron and the smart desktop environments, co-hosted by Finos. And we look forward to having you guys attend more events in the future. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.